Hi everybody, so this is video 2 for social psychology. I got cut off yesterday talking about the foot in the door phenomenon, and here's another application from your textbook. During the Korean War, the Chinese communists solicited cooperation from the US Army prisoners by asking them to carry out small errands. And it started very small, and then they were very likely to comply with large. Now, the Chinese communists ran these war camps, and they did not use any brutality, but they managed to secure prisoners' collaboration. So they started with small errands. They started with maybe radio appeals, false confessions, and some informed on fellow prisoners, some divulged military information. So when the prisoners were initially asked to speak or write trivial statements, it didn't seem like that big of a deal. But then the communists asked them to copy or create something more important. Perhaps even writing something like the flaws of capitalism. So these are Americans who are asked to write about how bad capitalism was. Then, in order to gain privileges, in order to have freedom to do other things, the prisoners participated in group discussions. They wrote self-criticisms. They even uttered public confessions. And this action caused them to change their beliefs. When the war ended, actually 21 prisoners chose to stay with communists, and more returned home brainwashed. They were convinced that communism was a good thing for Asia. So you can say that their strategy came from this foot in the door phenomenon that we talked about. Another compliance strategy is, in many ways, you could say almost the opposite. It's the door in the face phenomenon. This is where after people refuse a large request, people will look more favorably upon a follow-up request that seems small in comparison. So I guess the best example of this would be a person who calls you on the phone and asks for a donation. Hey, can we count on you to donate $100 to whatever this cause, very important cause is? Well, and somebody would say, no, I don't have $100. Well then, how about $50? Well then, how about $20? And eventually, research shows that they do end up getting something from people. And then finally, the most maybe common sense compliance strategy is the norms of reciprocity. So this is where it's really when you think of common courtesy. If you think that someone does something nice for you, it's your duty to do something nice in return. So mom gives you something and you pay her back by washing the dishes or whatever. Charities use this one when they send you some kind of free gift in the mail with their request for money. So if they send those address labels, or think of the March of Dimes where they actually send a real dime to people, people feel compelled because they got something, even though it's just a dime, they feel compelled to reciprocate. So they do send back some kind of money because they don't feel right about just getting a gift for free. So I talked in class today about the fundamental attribution error. So we tend to overestimate the role of the dispositional factors, and we underestimate the role of situational factors. One thing about this fundamental attribution error is initially psychologists thought that they called it fundamental because they thought it was for everybody. Everybody did this. But actually today, this is somewhat cultural. It's found much more often in individualist cultures than collectivist cultures. Now think about that error in and of itself. It tells us something about the researchers. Most of these researchers were American, so they noticed this attribution error with their subjects, Americans, and they made the assumption that everybody is just like us. Do you remember that term from the first unit? There's that false consensus effect. So it comes back to us with social psych. False consensus is we think that everybody's like us. Another example, you start a romance, you love this person, you're great, you assume they agree with your world views. You look at politics the same, you eat the same kind of food, you just assume that you're the same. That would be considered the honeymoon period. In reality, you will notice differences further on down the road. Another example from part 1 of AP Psych was with music. What kind of music do you prefer? Consider your friends, the people you hang out with. Do they all listen to that kind of music? Is it possible you have this assumption that everybody likes the music like you? That would be a false consensus effect. And then we suffer from another bias, another thing that affects how we view others. That is a self-serving bias. And this should look like a review term as well. This is the tendency to take more credit for good outcomes and less for the bad ones. So you're in a sport, you win a game, it's definitely because you're awesome, because you worked hard, because you're the best. Now, if you lose, it must have been the coach. The coach made the wrong decision, or it was because of the weather, or the refs were bad. So the next section of social psych is about stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination. What is a stereotype anyway? Well, this is an overgeneralized idea about a group of people. Stereotypes can be positive or negative. Now, looking at it from Piaget's point of view, Piaget would view stereotypes as strict schemas about various groups of people. So remember, we form schemas about different things, and then if we have some kind of evidence or example that challenges our schema, we might choose to accommodate or assimilate those ideas. And the next term is prejudice. This is an undeserved, usually negative attitude towards a group of people. Stereotyping leads to prejudice. When negative stereotypes are applied to all members of a group, resulting in a negative attitude towards members of that group, this is where stereotyping leads to prejudice. So the key distinction here is prejudice is an attitude. And the next concept we have is discrimination, and discrimination is the action or the behavior. So here are the components of prejudice. And prejudice works at both a conscious and unconscious level. And here's one example of how prejudices can change. I'm actually quite surprised at the large percentage that still doesn't approve of marriage between blacks and whites. And here's an example of racial and gender prejudice. Now, most of us like to believe that we're beyond racism, we're beyond these prejudices, but here's a recent study. When you look at words like peace and paradise, people were slow to respond when they saw a black individual's photo compared to a white individual. And I'm going to wrap it up for now. You'll have a second video later.